Hi, good morning. Today I would like to talk about how a government procedure could be streamlined or standardized to reduce corruption. So I'll narrate an incident, and from that incident, you will understand how to standardize a procedure, government procedures. This incident happened in the 1990s in a certain state in the north of India. There was a directorate for information and public relations. An IAS officer was appointed as the a director of this directorate, and there was a certain wing in the directorate that took care of issuing advertisements to the newspaper on behalf of the government. There was a certain committee called Advertisement Accreditation Committee, which selected the newspapers that would put the government advertisement in their newspapers, and there were a lot of them. It was a big selection. The bill payments for them was also a huge process, because of which there were certain influential connected newspaper companies to the officials who were able to get their payments quicker than many other newspapers, and those other newspapers would have to pay speed money to get their process done on time. So basically what is happening is the rest of the newspapers which are not influential, which are not connected to the officials, were having to pay some money to get their payment, to pay money to get money. So the new director got to know about this chaos in the directorate, and he decided to change the state of affairs. Firstly, he called all the officials of the advertisement department of the Directorate of Information and Public Relations, and told them about his proposal to change the state of affairs. Initially, they resisted. Initially, they insisted that the status quo should continue. But the director was successful in getting them convinced to his line of thought. Later, the director would go and meet the officials who were at various stages of processing a bill of a newspaper. And there he would ascertain how much time was required at each stage to process the bill, and based on that time, he set a timeline within which each stage would be processed, and he also gave an additional 1 day at each stage in that entire timeline. This way, finally, it was decided there would be 14 days that would be required, and they decided that from the time that they receive the bill from a newspaper, they would take 14 days to process the entire bill and give the payment to the newspaper. And at the same time, it was also decided that the date on which the newspaper would receive the payment would be printed on the receipt, which would be given at the first stage of the processing. And that is when the bill would be provided by the newspaper. So basically, the process went like this: a newspaper would give the bill. It would reach the preliminary stage. There, the processing would be done. It won't come back to this stage again, and at that time, the receipt will be provided to the newspaper on which there would be a date as to when they will receive the payment, and that date would be uh, 14 days from the time the bill was submitted to the department, to the a wing of the directorate. And most importantly, it was also instructed that a certain group of privileged, well-connected newspapers would not get their process done quicker than the other newspapers. The payment of the bill will happen in a sequential order in which the newspapers submitted their bills. So this proposal was made, and it had to go to the chief minister. The well-connected and a privileged group of newspapers had their attention towards this proposal, because naturally they were going to lose out because of this proposal, and therefore they went to the extent of meeting the chief minister to ensure that their privileges are given back. But the chief minister himself did not agree with the point of view of this privileged section of the newspapers, and he gave a green signal to the new proposal for streamlining, for standardizing the government processes of bill payment. The director also met with the privileged sections of the newspaper and tried to convince them of his logic, and they were convinced. But there is one person who was a former director of the Directorate of Information and Public Relations. He comes to the present director and tells him that from the time the new proposals would be put into action, it will actually erode the power of the director, because no longer with the privileged section of newspapers come to the director asking for favors so that their payment is done quicker. So that privilege of the director would be lost from that point on. That was the point of the ex-director of the Directorate of Information and Public Relations. The present director disagreed with this point of view, and he was not interested in ensuring that a certain section is obliged to him all the time, though in the past there was discretion to the bureaucracy to ensure that a certain group was favored. This way, I hope you understood how government processes could be streamlined. You could see that how times were set at each stage, and how that extra buffer time was also given at each stage to ensure that there would be timely payment to all the newspapers. And also it was also made a rule that the payment would be done in a sequential manner, which means the privilege section would not be prioritized over other newspapers. In the past, many of the newspapers which were not privileged were not able to get their payments on time. They had to either spend some speed money, or they had to wait. But now it was based on sequential payment of the newspapers. So the privilege section and the normal newspapers, there was no distinction between them. They were all to be paid based on rules.